Well, it is the end of the second week of fall camp for UCF. What have we learned so far? And what are some of the tidbits that coaches have thrown to us to see who will be starting this season? Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Charge On. As always, I am your host, Sean Green. Before we get started, as always, a quick word from our sponsor, BetOnline. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything online sports betting. Right now, you can receive a 50% free bet of up to $250 on your first deposit to bet on anything from the Olympics to baseball to Formula One racing. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with over our 150 slot games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Use promo code BELIEVE for your 50% free bet credit on your first deposit up to $250. BetOnline. The game starts here. Nick Geddes joins me. Two-episode week. Wasn't expecting a two-episode week. Obviously, Javon Boggs is to thank for that. For committing at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. So
I like it.
Yeah. Well, you weren't on because I recorded it quick, and it was an unexpected thing, but I want to get your thoughts really quick before we jump into a very packed show today. But obviously, he's been my number one target. Like we've mentioned Javon Boggs on this show for God knows how long, but kind of give your thoughts on a crazy recruitment for Boggs.
Yeah, this is huge, and for so many reasons. I mean, first of all, the talent of a Javon Boggs, I think that clearly is evident to everybody. Top 200 player in the nation. That's pretty consensus, I'd say, across the board. And, we've seen UCF sort of get a couple of these really highly rated 4-star guys, like John Walker. They've all come, though, on like the defensive side of the ball. But to my knowledge, just like the first real big one that UCF has been able to land, at least in the Gus Malzahn era, at one of the skill positions. And I think wide receiver in the modern game of football has become, you can make an argument, the third most important position in football outside of quarterback, left tackle. I mean, you could make that argument. Receiver is so important, clearly in the NFL. But I think it translates to college as well. And so I think, that you need to get an infuse of talent into that room because you're going to start losing some guys here in the next year or two. So that makes it a big deal. And also, with this recruitment, it bumped UCF officially to the number one recruiting class in the Big 12, which we continue to say it, that UCF had all the tools necessary around them and the head coach to do it, to go out and, hey, let's start recruiting the number one class in the Big 12, because as we've said, this isn't like a conference at the moment that is, like, these teams that we're recruiting against are not guys that are, or teams that are usually recruiting in like that top 30 sort of part of college football. I mean, you've seen like Texas Tech getting there and Kansas State and Oklahoma State from time to time, but I think UCF, we've all agreed on, has a really good shot at doing this year in and year out, and it's an encouraging sign that they've been able to put this together for 2025. Hope the class sticks, and I hope we get some more booms on the way. I think we will, but this is definitely the most significant one, I think, of this class.
No, it's significant, and again, but besides Tavion Swint, I thought Tavion Swint, in terms of importance of committed early, stuck it through to the end. Can we make it to the finish line with him? It seems like that is going to happen. I thought Javon Boggs was right up there. Again, local kid, state champion, one of the best receivers in the country. Yes, he is playing with one of the best quarterbacks of the 26 class, but at the end of the day, talent is talent. So to get him to commit is huge. I was in the press conference room a couple days ago and we were all talking about it. And he said, a couple guys were mentioning like, okay, well, will this stick? And I said, UCF, if you look historically, UCF has not really, when a guy commits, I think there's only been in the last 3 years, like 3 guys, Nick, that decommit, that commit to UCF and then like decommit. So for the most part, like UCF has kept guys committed. And we'll see, like with a commitment like this, you never know, especially with the whirlwind that's gone on. And with a lot of guys, you don't know if this commitment kind of forces maybe one of the other receivers that commit to decommit. So who knows, but big time for UCF, clear-cut top 25 class right now among all the national recruiting sites. So it's doing good there. But with that being said, we've got football. It was only the first week of camp last week, Nick. And we heard some stuff. We talked about Gus Malzahn really kind of being a little different and showing a little bit of oomph, if you know what I mean. Just a different side of Gus that maybe we haven't been accustomed to the last couple years, specifically last year. And this week specifically, there was a little bit more of that. I attended a couple pressers the last week. I'll be attending more. Obviously, I told you guys throughout the year that's going to be apparent for both of us. We're going to be trying to attend as many press conferences and media availabilities as humanly possible, so we can get the vibe of the room. And I attended the first scrimmage, first post media availability for the scrimmage. Didn't get to watch the scrimmage. That was closed to media. But we have some clips, and I think it's important to hear about some of this stuff. Now, we also have some mixed in from this past week, the second week. Obviously, the second scrimmage is tomorrow, so we'll be talking about that on next week's episode of Charge On as we get closer and closer to opening day. But let's start with the defensive line, Nick. Gus talked about the defensive line in the first scrimmage, and I mean, what was very apparent, and we're going to play the clip, but it was very apparent that the D-line played really well.
Second half, it was more pressure. There were some good things that happened. Really what stood out to me, big picture, the defensive line really was active. They knocked a lot of balls down. There were some sacks. They really came off and read some screens well. That's really what stood out to me defensively.
So Gus said it. I mean, the defensive line, he mentioned it a little bit later in the press conference, how they were having TFLs, they were having a bunch of sacks. We'll get into some of the negatives about that in a second, but for a team, Nick, that didn't really get a lot of pressure this past year, and again, they didn't have Ricky Barber, you had a young John Walker getting a lot of playing time. There was a lot of things working against them, but how nice is it to hear in this first couple weeks that the defensive line is really, showing up and making a name early?
It doesn't really surprise me, to be honest with you, because, I think maybe a few months ago when we were kind of looking at the position groups and going, what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses? That defensive line unit, I think you can make an argument is the overall strength of the team. You mean outside of running back, maybe. But, I mean, with all the experience that a Lee Hunter and a Ricky Barber are going to give you, John Walker, obviously, I think this is his year now to truly, really stand out. And then even like the guys on the edge, like a Malachi Lawrence, and they brought in Nigel Kelly and Dalen Dotson and so on. You go down the list, like they have a lot of really, really quality players and quality depth there on that defensive line. So it doesn't surprise me that they're sort of starting to stand out already. I want to see it in game time. And of course, we're really not going to know anything about this team until we get to week 3. But I think one of the big questions I have for the defensive line, while there is some quality players there, like I just mentioned, it's, I want them to really have an emphasis, and I think there is, stopping the run this year, because I think that was one of the issues that plagued them. And I went back and looked at Ted Roof and sort of his, I didn't go back at his entire coaching career. I mean, we don't have time for that.
That'd be a lot.
But at least what he did here in the short term at Oklahoma in his 2 years, and 2022, not so great, but 2023, there was a couple of key statistics I thought that were telling. They were third against the run in the Big 12 last year, and they also were able to get off the field at a really good rate. They were 14th nationally on third down. So those are definitely two areas that UCF really needs to improve at. Now, Oklahoma, while not known for their defense, I'm going to say they probably had a lot. I mean, as much as I like the UCF guys, Oklahoma obviously had a lot of really good players too. I'm sure that played a role in it. But I think that there probably is an emphasis, I think, on those two things that I'm looking at that they had some success with under Ted Roof, Oklahoma, that is, that hopefully that can translate over to UCF with the players that we have here, and that's stopping the run and that's getting off the field on third down.
And listen, all this is just talk. Like, at the end of the day, I was talking to somebody like last week, and we were talking about how Colorado should be an easy win for UCF. And I said, though I do think that UCF will beat Colorado, my fear is UCF can't get into shootouts like they did last year with some of the teams that they played.
No.
Because UCF would beat themselves. You played against a team like West Virginia, right? You beat yourselves by throwing 4 interceptions. But again, like, you look at so many teams that they played, they just couldn't stop the run, and you're right. So it's
and there's
refreshing.
A lot of good backs in this conference. A lot of good backs in this conference.
And UCF's not going to be playing probably the top 3. You can make the argument, not besides RJ. Like, RJ, in my opinion, is a top 3 back in the Big 12. You can make the argument number 1. But you're not having to play Ollie Gordon again. You're not having to play Taj Brooks. And you're not having to play the Kansas running back.
Devin
I don't
Neal.
know why I'm blanking on his name. But you don't have to play... Yep, Devin Neal. So you don't have to play those 3 guys. So you're kind of getting a pass. Now, you're still having to play some really tough backs. But you're getting a pass. Defensive line clearly has shown something in this camp. You have a healthy Ricky Barber, which I think is huge. You have Lee Hunter and Ricky Barber in the middle. You have a really good backup defensive tackle in John Walker and other guys. So clearly the line is kind of shaping up and wrecking havoc. Now, with that being said, and we're going to get into this, because you mentioned Ted Roof. Penalties. Now, granted, it was just the first practice, right? It was the first scrimmage. Let me emphasize that. It was just the first scrimmage. But Gus talked about penalties, and I will say when he said this number, it did shock me. So let's hear from Gus Malzahn talking about the penalties from Saturday's scrimmage.
They had 5 penalties, though. There was a lot of penalties, 18 total penalties, 5 for the offense, 13 for the defense. We talked hard about pre-snap penalties, being disciplined, everything. And we got to do a better job in that. When you let everybody play, you know, obviously things happen like that, but we got to really, from a big picture standpoint, that'll be the emphasis moving forward. I don't know. I mean, last year we were one of the most undisciplined teams in college football penalty-wise, so no. But, you know, the first time when you let everybody go, all right, that's what happens. And the great thing from a coach's standpoint is now we know we better address it, and that's coaching, and that's on us. So I promise you we'll do a better job each time we go out there with that. But it was the same carryover, you know, as last year as far as the penalties.
13 penalties for the defense. And when he was asked the answer about what type of penalties they were pre-snap penalties. So what does that mean, Nick? What does that mean? Well, it means in my head, Ted Roof, a very aggressive type coach, that has not been a secret. He's a very aggressive defensive coordinator. That's probably a lot of guys jumping off sides, trying to get a quick out to get to the quarterback, and that's false start. That's 5 yards. I don't know how many of those were, but 13, probably a good amount of them were false starts. So I get it's the first scrimmage. We'll see if they cleaned anything up on Saturday, but kind of where is when you hear 13 penalties for the defense, does that bring you any concern, even though it's early?
Yes and no. Because we talked a lot about Gus's, you know, what he was saying and his demeanor, you know, the last couple of weeks in some of these press conferences, and he was been pretty blunt and pretty to the point about being undisciplined and all he used the word crap, I know, somewhere in there to sort of describe the way that they played in that sort of facet of their game last year. So to see that, you know, him put that out there in the public and then for that to carry over, that's something that you have to monitor. But at the same time, like you said, they're integrating a new sort of system defensively. And when you have 13 penalties, you think you would associate those with a lot of offsides and jumping the snaps and things like that. I'm sure some guys probably got grabby in the secondary too. You know, you just want to hope that once you get to the second practice that maybe you cut that in half. Now, 9 penalties in a game is already too much, but you got to start somewhere. So hopefully they cut that in half. You know, he mentioned being one of the more undisciplined teams in the nation last year. They were 78th. I think they were tied for 78th in penalties last year. And actually, they're very fortunate because for as many penalties as they had last year, from a penalty yardage standpoint, they were actually in the top 20 nationally. So it probably could have hurt them even more last year. But that tells me they probably had a lot of false starts, offsides, just stupid stuff like that, you know, kills your operation on offense and defense. So they still have time to clean some of that stuff up. And like we've been saying, not overlooking necessarily the first 2 games of the season, but if you go to TCU on the road in that environment, you can't have these penalties popping up, and that's an obvious statement. But this is a veteran coaching staff, and I don't think they're gonna put up with it for long.
No, and again, I tried to put last year so far in the back of my head, but I think a good portion of it was on the offensive line, jumping, and those would be easy false start penalties. The defensive line, same thing. So again, I definitely put stock into it. I put in the back of my head that on scrimmage 1, the entire team as a whole had 18 penalties. But at the same time, we don't know, was that first team, was it second team, was it third team? Like, you had a bunch of guys playing. So again, context, hindsight is 2020. But if we keep hearing the same thing, and I'm sure if penalties are a problem, Nick, we're not going to hear about them in the next couple weeks, because this is a clear-cut, hey, we had 18 penalties, we're going to clean that up. And I love the answer by Gus. Again, I'm loving this Gus Malzahn. He was like, this is coaching. This is not going to be accepted. We need to fix it, and we're going to hold everybody accountable. If you're going to hurt us by having a bunch of penalties, basically you're not going to play. And we need to be better coaches and make sure that we are emphasizing it. Sticking on the defense, because there were a couple other quotes from Gus. I never thought, Nick, and we keep mentioning this, I never thought I would say I have a multitude of Gus quotes that I want to play for everybody because I love what I hear. Again, it's all talk. It's talking season. But Ted Roof, I think, slipped up a little bit. We've been talking about linebackers. We've been talking about who might be starting. And Ted Roof, it wasn't even a question about linebackers or nothing like that. But he did kind of slip up when talking about, and he mentioned 2 numbers, and I find it very intriguing. So let's hear what Ted Roof was just talking about randomly.
A much greater depth than just number 3 or number 32. There's just got to be a lot more connection, and there has to be intentionality behind that connection. Just to assume as a coach that's going to happen, that's not true. But the best teams that I have been around have been the most connected. So to spend time. And
I just cut it there because I heard 3 and 32, Nick, and I know 3 and 32 is Ethan Barr and Deshaun Pace.
Yeah.
I'm not saying, and listen, as of this recording, it is August 8th. By the time you are listening to this, it's probably August 9th or August 10th. A lot can happen in the next couple weeks. A lot of guys can step up, and I'm also sure these guys are not going to be in 99% of the time. You're going to have guys come in, second team guys come in and try and take some snaps. But I find it very interesting when a coach kind of slips up a little bit in the first 2 numbers he says are 3 and 32. And it's a position that he is he's the coach of the line. He coaches linebackers. He probably says 3 and 32 very often. So that kind of tells me that as of right now, Ethan Barr and Deshaun Pace are your starting linebackers heading into the season.
Yeah.
So and who knows? Again, he mentioned Andrew Harris in the presser, which I loved hearing that Andrew Harris was impressing. But do you have anything to say on the linebackers and that little nugget that could be nothing? Could just be him mentioning those 2 random numbers, but I found it to be very interesting.
I mean, I don't really I'm not shocked if those are the 2 guys that they roll with, at least to start with, because they're very experienced and they started at, solid programs and things like that. And then I think when you have a veteran coaching staff that's here and is sort of thinking, not that they're not thinking in the long term, because clearly when you have the recruiting discussion, they are, but there's such an emphasis this year to sort of strike, I guess, and to take advantage of a wide open field that maybe some of the more unproven guys, even though they haven't been in this program, these veterans, they're going to give them the keys to this, I guess, so to say, to start. And that could change, eventually as we get into the season. But I have no problem with that whatsoever. If it's Ethan Barr and Deshaun Pace, I mean, it goes back to what we said last week. The transfer class that they brought in this year is going to be far more impactful than the transfer class you saw last year.
100%. 100%. And again, Ethan Barr's not that surprising. We expected that. He's a team captain, 4 years, or I don't know how many year captain, but played a lot of ball at Vanderbilt. So doesn't shock me at all. Deshaun Pace, also not that shocking. I think those were the two that kind of started for the spring game. So Gus said they want playmakers. Clearly, as of right now, those two are the guys that have been playmakers. Nothing is official, though. That is just me speculating and taking something that I kind of just heard and saying, that's interesting, which will be a couple more things that we listen to. So let's go to the offense really quick. Been hearing a lot about the offense. I'm going to mention one thing here. Okay? Hasn't been really reported heavily. I'm not reporting anything crazy. All I'm going to say is this one comment. Okay? UCF has 2 starting quarterbacks on the roster. I think that's a safe assessment. Ja'Cory Brown has been doing extremely well in camp from everything I've been hearing. So that should bring UCF fans, and I want to get your take, Nick, but we talked about it. My nervousness for next year, even though we haven't played this year, was somewhere. Because it's like, okay, who's really going to be the quarterback next year? Like, Ja'Cory Brown clearly came in to be the starter next year. He's going to learn for a year. But how good is he going? Like, how good is he really, right? From everything I've heard, people are very pleased with how Ja'Cory Brown has come in and performed early on. So that's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing that UCF has 2 really good starting quarterbacks. So take that for what you will. But kind of how much comfort does it bring you? Again, only 2 weeks into camp. Who knows what can happen? Guys below him can exceed him. But how good is it that another transfer quarterback that you brought in to potentially play next year is performing extremely well?
I mean, I like the mindset that I think he's brought into this camp, because they bring in KJ Jefferson, the starts that he had in the SEC at Arkansas. It's like the assumption, and it's not really an assumption. It's we all just knew it, and they said it, that, hey, this is KJ's football team, and he's going to be the quarterback. And I think sometimes as a backup, like you know that, like, okay, I'm the backup. And I think that it's maybe hard sometimes when you go to practice to like the mentality then there of how you're going to perform. But it's been the opposite of Ja'Cory. From everything that you've been hearing, from what I've been hearing, and from those who have boots on the ground there every day, it seems like Ja'Cory has really, taken to what his role is going to be. And he's not dogging it or anything like that. He's really showing out and trying to show these coaches that, hey, I know KJ is the guy, but, I'm pretty talented too.
Yeah.
You brought me in as well, and I chose to come here. So I think we're far away from having some sort of quarterback controversy or, big question mark. I mean, we haven't even seen the games yet. But it definitely is, reassuring, like you said, for 2025. And I know we got to play 2024, but looking ahead, it's the most important position on the field. And you want to know who that guy's going to be, next year and the year after that. And Ja'Cory, with those 2 years of eligibility and the fact that he was a highly touted recruit and he did go to Miami, like, he's definitely going to get a strong look there. Yeah. And who knows? Maybe KJ stumbles at some point this season and we see Ja'Cory. That very well could happen. But the fact that he's opened up camp and he's looked really sharp and there really hasn't been a drop-off one way or the other from KJ to Ja'Cory or Ja'Cory to KJ, that's a very encouraging sign.
And Ja'Cory hasn't been live. He has not been live. KJ has not been live. Ja'Cory has been live. Dylan Risk was the only one that didn't go live besides KJ on Saturday, but Ja'Cory was live. And you have to look at it towards the future, but you can also look at it for this season. Like, yeah, if KJ gets injured, you have a guy that can step right in. And listen, who knows? Like, Dylan could be the guy too. I'm just saying that I've heard from multiple people that Ja'Cory Brown has had a really good fall camp to start. And he hasn't been here that long. I mean, he wasn't here for spring. So that's what I'm hearing. But again, KJ Jefferson, when he is live, is a different type of player. So I'm intrigued to finally get KJ live in a game, and we'll see that in a couple weeks. But wide receiver, I think that has been a main topic on this show, on many shows, because everybody wants to know who's going to be the wide receiver 3. Before I play this clip, I do think, Nick, that this is going to be a little bit different than maybe in years past. I think UCF is going to go a little bit of a mix and match. I think you're going to see a couple different guys take on the wide receiver 3 type of position, depending on matchup, depending on scheme. I think there's going to be a bunch of different guys. One of those names is Jacoby Jones. And Jacoby Jones had 2 touchdowns on Saturday. When you see him in person, he is huge. He's a big receiver. It was a guy that you really wanted. You really wanted Jacoby Jones. He's been impressing, but he also, again, he's come in late. And one name has clearly, and again, when you have to try and read through the tea leaves. You have to try and find the information. So Tim Harris had his media availability this week, and this is after Jacoby Jones had his 2 touchdown performance. And when he was talking about receivers and kind of guys that could be wide receiver 3, and this is what he had to say. And I'm right after going to play some quotes from Kobe Hudson and Mac McWilliams about a certain wide receiver who has made an impact or something that we'll just play. Tim Harris on wide receiver 3.
Well, I'll be honest. I won't even say that, anybody's ahead of anyone right now. We got extreme competition in that receiver room now, and it's coming down to a lot of things. Every day, that rotation changes a little bit. I've talked about Chauncey Magwood, though. He's a guy that's stepped up in training camp and doing some really good things. Being consistent more than anything. Trent Whitmore, same thing. He's a steady guy, and Trent is a worker. Always going to know exactly where you got to be. He knows his deficiencies in his game, and he knows how to make sure that he covers himself forward and get into the right spot. Xavier Townsend, you talked about, obviously done a good job continuing to elevate. Jacoby, who we just talked about, doing a good job. And then all of our young guys, you're seeing it from all of our young guys continuing to progress from spring ball. Tyree Patterson, Bradell Richardson, all those guys. And I may be missing some guys, but those are the key guys that are getting a lot of looks right now. But our receiver position, there's no one ahead of anybody right now. There's constant competition. There's pressure on them every day to make sure that they go out there and put the right stuff on tape.
Got guys like Chauncey Magwood stepping up big time. Like, he had an injury last year, but he's a guy. Like, he's a real guy. Like, one of the best receivers I've played with, like, as far as movement-wise.
I say Kobe Hudson. Yeah, he's definitely one of them ones. And Magwood, I could say them two. They definitely challenge him on the cover.
So if you couldn't hear that second part, Kobe Hudson said that one of the best wide receivers he's played with was Chauncey Magwood. And if you didn't hear the second one, that was Mac McWilliams, who's the new corner from UAB, who I think might potentially be a starting corner for UCF this year, said that some of the hardest covers that he's had against wide receivers in camp has been Kobe Hudson and Chauncey Magwood. Now, we go back to Tim Harris. Coaches don't just say things, when coaches are speaking to the media, and I might be, again, I want to preference this, I might be wrong. I have no idea who the wide receiver 3 is going to be. I've got no intel on this. I have no idea. When you get mentioned and you're number one, the first name that comes out of his mouth, and I want Jacoby Jones to get minutes. Randy Pittman has pushed for Jacoby Jones in the media. He basically said, I want to be more like Jacoby Jones. Jacoby Jones. A lot of people have mentioned Jacoby Jones. But Jacoby Jones has only been here a couple weeks in fall camp. Chauncey Magwood was here for a year. We found out just now that he was injured. That's why we didn't see him last year. Now also we had a clear-cut wide receiver 1, 2, and 3 last year, whereas now we kind of have an open slot. Tim Harris mentioned Chauncey Magwood right off the jump. Even though he said it's an open competition and there's a lot of guys, nobody has separated himself, he mentioned Chauncey Magwood first. Then he mentioned Trent Whitmore, which we've been seeing clips of Trent Whitmore, Nick. KJ's been throwing him balls. I think, again, when you talk about just an older veteran type of receiver, you bring in a guy like Trent Whitmore for that reason. Mentions Xavier Townsend, third. So you kind of start thinking, okay, he's kind of running out of names. And then he mentions Jacoby Jones. I'm not saying Chauncey Magwood's going to be wide receiver 3, but it sure is seeming, Nick, like there is a clear-cut guy that has definitely performed and caught the eye of many, and that is Chauncey Magwood.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to spring camp. I believe he had a really good spring when he was able to get on the field, and he even had a good moment in the spring game. I think he had a 70-yard, a big play that he used. It was mostly on his explosiveness, which we got a chance to see, which that was a good sign coming off the injury, right? Yeah, I think it's a very wide open spot though, and whoever that guy is going to be, I can make an argument, Sean, that if you lump the tight end position to who's going to be the guy that is the proverbial wide receiver 3, like I can make an argument, Randy Pittman. I think he's been sort of the not sleeping giant necessarily, but you haven't heard much from Randy, I feel like, during this camp. And I know he's a tight end. It's not a sexy position and all those things. But I really thought I saw some good flashes last year from Randy Pittman as a true freshman, mind you. Mm-hmm. And I think this year, I like to think that's going to carry over, and he's going to get even better. I mean, remember, he was a very sought after tight end when they got him in that 2023 class last year. So I could see Randy Pittman being that guy that's, hey, if it's not Kobe, if it's not Xavier, Randy, hey, you're going to be that guy. I could see that. So who knows? But I do think that it's going to be a rotation of guys that are going to see some play between Magwood. I mean, Jacoby Jones, we forget, he's coming off an injury as well last year at Ohio. The year before that, he was outstanding. And then Trent Whittemore, I'm gonna wait and see with Trent Whittemore right now. We saw flashes of him last year. Flashes, and I don't say flashes in the way of like, oh, he flashed in like a good way. It was just more of like we would see him every now and then, and I wasn't overly impressed necessarily in game. Yeah. So we'll see what he gives you, but I think clearly cross your fingers if Kobe and Xavier Townsend are healthy. I mean, you saw what happened last year. Like there were games where Xavier Townsend wasn't in it. It was all Javon Baker and it was all Kobe Hudson. And the offense put up a lot of yards and things and stuff like that and points at times. So I'm not as stressed out about who's going to be that number 3 option at this moment. But I do like there's a good competition, and Magwood, especially coming off the injury, it seems like you'd have to say he's in the league for that.
And you mentioned Randy Pittman. What I will say is in one of the clips that UCF put out, there was a 50-50 ball thrown up to Randy, and I forgot who played good defense on it, but it didn't get caught. But I forgot which coach mentioned it. I think it must have been Tim Harris, but they did mention that they're kind of using Randy. They don't have a Javon Baker. And he said, Javon, what was great about Javon, he was the 50-50 ball guy. Like, he would kind of mask some of your inconsistencies on offense because he would come down with, those 50-50 balls. And he goes, we're trying to get Randy to play more of that type of role, where I think in the red zone, if you're throwing it, there's going to be a lot of those kind of Gronk to the corner, fade balls over the shoulder to try and get Randy Pittman to go over a guy. So I don't think that is a stretch to say that Randy Pittman is clear-cut wide receiver 3 at this point. But it'll be interesting to see who's out there with them. And to that point, I mean, you could also make the argument with Penny Boone, you might see a lot of 2 running back sets. I really want to see that.
Yeah, so they have a lot of creative ways that they can get a lot of these skill guys to football. Yeah. They have a lot of creative ways they can do it.
No, so that's what brings me excitement, because it's like if you can have Pittman, Kobe, Xavier as your receivers, and then you put RJ Harvey and Penny Boone right back there behind KJ, it's like, as a defense, that's what's exciting. It's like, okay, where's the ball going and who's going to be running the ball? Like, is it going to be KJ? Is it going to be RJ Penny? Like, it becomes exciting. Now, to close it out, we have a couple clips from Gus. And we did a whole episode. We did a 30-minute episode on Gus last week. So I don't want to... But he said a couple things interesting this week that got me fired up. And also, it's almost like he's speaking to the public. I also want to mention, on one of these clips, the reporter was asking Gus and talking about, having a bounce back year. And Gus interrupted him while he was asking the question. And he said, no, we're going to have a bounce back year. That's not a question. We are going to have a bounce back year. Continue. And he continued on with this question. Gus, there's a different aura around Malzahn this year. So I have two clips. One is about him not resting guys. He basically, they were saying, are you being smart with, RJ Harvey? You know what you're going to get, KJ, blah, blah, blah. And hear what he has to say, because, again, I find it interesting, especially after the year we had last year.
No way. RJ, we're going to use our common sense, but let me tell you, we're going to make sure everybody has that hard edge. Everybody. So, no, like I said, last year, it was on me. Hey, we're going to get our guys to the game, and we did. But at the same time, we didn't have that really disciplined, hard-nosed edge that I like once we got in the season. So, we'll use our common sense. RJ is one of the better offensive weapons in college football. Y'all know that. But at the same time, everyone has to be prepared. And it's so much about earning the guys' respect beside you. Okay, that's the most important thing. Even more important than earning your coach's respect. So we're in the process of all the players doing that.
So this year's motto is tough and together. TNT. Tough and together. And Nick, I think after the 2022 season, that training camp heading into the first season of the Big 12, right? So 2023, I think Gus let up a little bit because of, the end of the 2022 season, JRP was hurt. A lot of guys were banged up. And I think Gus, heading into the first Big 12 season, there might have been, I don't want to say coddling, but there, I think, was we need to get everybody to game one. And I think Gus even mentioned that. We were just trying to get everybody healthy to game one. And we got exposed when we were playing in those tight games because we weren't playing with the discipline, we weren't playing with the toughness that we needed. So when you hear Gus talking about kind of just going at it in fall camp to make sure that when you get in those situations, you're ready. Again, does it bring you any more confidence?
It's all words at the moment.
Very true.
It's all words at the moment. I have to, like we said, a lot of this we have to see, and we're getting closer to that. And the whole TNT thing, you can put that on a t-shirt. I'm sure somebody probably has already. I like that. Tough and together. It goes down to everything we said last week, is that our expectations being what they were last year, and we were pretty tempered, I think, with them. And you could argue they met those expectations. Like when I said stuff like, hey, get 6 wins in a bowl appearance. Well, they did that. But it's always about the way that you get there sometimes. And the way that they got to that moment, to that benchmark, I'd call it, wasn't as buttoned up as you would like. And they were a few plays away from being a 9-win football team in the first year of the Big 12. And the conversations we'd be having now would be so much more different. So, again, I just think there's more of an urgency this year. Now that they're in year 4, it's time to go. And it's the excuses have got to go. And it's no longer we're playing in the first year of the Big 12. It's none of that stuff. We got to start winning games. We got to start closing some of these games that we really struggled with last year. Baylor coming to mind the most, right? So, but it's all words right now. I got to see it in live action, and hopefully we see a new team this year.
For sure. We have one more clip before we're going to close it out. This is just another clip about Gus, but again, it is words, but you kind of like the moxie that Gus is portraying heading into the season.
We're getting better. We're not there yet, but we're getting better. It's a process. We got so many new guys, and like I said last year, we were soft as butter, and that's on me. And so it's a process every single day, and we'll keep doing that until we get there. Yeah, we got talent, but we had some talent last year. But talent don't get it done. We are more talented. I will say that we got more talent than we had last year. But it's got to be that every single day, being more disciplined and everything. And today, like I told them afterwards, I'm not so worried about the execution piece of this first scrimmage. It's more big picture. Man, how did the offense handle success? How did they handle adversity? There was times it wasn't good. All right, are they going to fold like a chink tent, or are they going to step up, somebody lead, and let's go ahead and do it? Defense, same way. There's a lot of really good things. There were some bad things. There's some long drives. How are they going to respond when they're tired? Who are the leaders that are going to step up? And really, especially with the first group, I saw good things on both sides with the first group that will help us moving forward. So that's a process, but that was really good to see how we responded.
Soft like butter and tough like a cheap tent. I don't know.
Fold like a cheap tent. And that's so funny because those are the first two things I was going to say coming out of that clip. Soft as butter and fold like a cheap tent.
I mean,
it's
listen.
coach speak season. Really,
it's coach speak, but you can go back and watch Gus from last fall camp and the previous fall camp. This is just a different Gus. The 6 and 7 season really made Gus evaluate a lot. And at the end of the day, you got to go play the game, and we'll see if it translates. We'll see if the players are more disciplined. We'll see all this. And I'm excited. I'm excited tomorrow to hear what happened in scrimmage number 2. Was there a clear difference from 1 to 2? Who's kind of taking shape? Who's some of the, we're all finding that out in real time. But Gus is not holding back. Gus is not putting on this mantra that, oh, we're coming and we're, no, we're not there yet. And we're going to hold everybody accountable to make sure that we get to where we want to get to. So, and the players are saying it too. They said, it's just a little bit different. So, I don't know. It got me pumped. When I was sitting there, I was smiling from ear to ear. And I'm like, I don't know if I'm supposed to be doing this, but this is awesome. Nick, final thoughts. A lot there. A lot of stuff that we've learned. There was even a lot more than that I'm sure we'll learn as the weeks go on. Depth chart predictions, which we might do next week. I'm thinking we do depth chart predictions next week because, we're only a couple weeks away. But
yeah,
kind of give your final thoughts on this first 2 weeks or so of fall camp.
Yeah, we're slowly making our way there. We're navigating our way through talking season. But yeah, not much more to add. I know of note, we're recording this on Thursday, so by then the game will be over with. But shout out to Mr. Javon Baker. I know you got your Pats garb on tonight. He's making his debut as we record at this moment. And another guy who's of interest to you as well is making his debut. A very important debut, might I add, tonight. So if you're into preseason football, get your fix in this week.
Hey, also, Tremont Morris-Brash is doing pretty well over with the Chargers with the Harbaugh. So UCF guys making
Javon Baker's been a stud in camp from what I've seen too.
He has.
You can go down the rabbit hole sometimes of the Twitter training camp highlights, and it'll I'm telling you, it'll hurt you in fantasy drafts when you buy into them Twitter highlights. It can be dangerous, but I'm seeing one every single day about Javon Baker. So
he's making Christian Gonzalez
got a lot of
really
excitement
bad.
there.
No, he's from everything we've heard, he's been the most impressive wide receiver in camp. But the depth chart came out for the first preseason game, and he's one of the last ones on there. So
I'm gonna say it's on. I have it on my TV right now as we're recording, and it's Tyquan Thornton and KJ Osborne running point at receiver right now to start.
See, that's fine as long as I get to see Drake May and
he was warming up with Drake May. So
okay,
so we'll see that connection tonight. Hopefully.
Well, I will end this so I can go watch my NFL team that is going to cause me a lot of depression over the next couple of months. That's why I need UCF to be good.
Yep.
But all right, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. Quick programming note, we are only going to be one episode next week, just FYI. I'm going to be co-hosting In the Zone next Friday, I'm sure, with Tyler Karen on 96.9 The Game. Probably going to get it into a lot over the 3 hours. A lot of UCF talk. I'll also be on 96.9 The Game for a segment on Monday talking UCF second fall scrimmage. Wow. But I'll be on 96.9 The Game twice next week. So if you want even more UCF content to hear from me, go check that out. Please follow me and Nick, like, subscribe, comment, share, do all that you do. We greatly appreciate it. The season is fast approaching. All right, everybody, this has been Charge On, presented by Bet Online. We will see you next week.